Welcome back to the podcast. We are here with Michael Keplinger from Smash Brand, which is an agile brand strategy agency for consumer packaged goods that specializes in a complete approach to market research, product design, and testing. We are going to talk about so many subjects, going to have a lot of fun. Michael, glad to be talking to you.
Robert, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm super glad to have you. And I know that right before the call, we said we have all these ideas for things to talk about, but just right off the bat, just to give us some meat on the bone, what have you been up to the last 12 months or so? What has you excited? What should we really all know about as far as your projects, what you have going on, what just has you pumped up these days?
Yeah, we own our own brands, and that's what we do at our agency. And really what gets me passionate, what I get excited about is putting a really good product on the shelf. And it's not always what's in the pack or in the box, but really the perceptions that people take from it, whether it's the product itself or kind of how you communicate it and visualize it on pack.
Okay, and so to give us like a mind picture in our imagination as far as the packaging, the branding, the things that you work on, is there a project? Is there some kind of packaging or branding that you've been involved in recently that just has you like really proud of, like as far as like a really good job you did and like things about it that stood out?
I'll just go ahead and talk about the brand we own, a brand that we own. We sell, it's a kids gummy vitamin line called Squiggles. And it does well exclusively on Amazon, and we are seeing increased competition. And so we're currently in the midst of a big rebranding there and elevating the brand. And that's what's got me really super excited lately.
And so these are gummies for kids?
That's right. Yeah. Vitamins.
Oh, cool. Vitamin gummies for kids.
I've got 3 kids. It's the only way my kids eat vitamins.
Nice. And it's always fun to hear about some of these Amazon e-commerce products because people have all these amazing ideas. Like I think I talked to one guy on an interview once who it was like a kitchen cutting board with all kinds of measurements built in. And it's like some of these Amazon things that these guys come up with. I'm like, why is this not in stores? Why is this not at Walmart or Target or something? Like some of these people come up with these really innovative things. And so as far as, like you said, that there's these gummies for kids, so that way they take their vitamins the right way, but there is competition kind of working its way in there. So what have you had to do to stand out and stay competitive? And I imagine there's things, but like with the copywriting, with the packaging, but what have you had to do to kind of stay alive in the cutthroat Amazon world?
Yeah, I mean, you unpacked so many things, whether you realized it or not, when you were kind of talking through that. I think the world is definitely different of how a product comes to market, and that's because it's so much easier, and we can test things and get things that are working. And really, that's what ends up on the shelf, is because you just know it's going to work because it's kind of was a lot easier. So, but the flip side of that, which is really answering your question, is with that comes so much more competition. And so we launched this brand almost 2 years ago, kind of a gap in the marketplace, specific kind of supplements that were needed for kids. I guess like kind of scratching your own itch, something that we needed wasn't available, so we made it. And that's really kind of how we got some traction. But usually when you do well and you're serving an underserved need, then other people come and do the same thing. And so where we are today is, I think that we got our traction, we got our movement because we're serving a need that really you couldn't get anywhere else. And so, and I own a branding agency, so I like to believe we did a pretty good job branding our products. But today we've just got consumers have a lot more choices. And so those brands, and you don't know what they look like until they're there. And so the perception that we get as a brand in relation to my competitors is different today. And so we see an opportunity to carve out a different kind of, it's not radically different, but elevating the brand to just kind of being a leader and connecting more with really, where maybe we do a lot of talking about our ingredients, which is really common with supplements and things like this, and elevating above to more of like a need state. So we're moving up to how parents think about what their needs of their kids are, and deep down in your head, that's a bit more of an emotional thing going on in your head. And so you get some consumer insight, you understand how that thinking process goes, and you recraft your brand through, ultimately, like, what is my strategy that's different? How do I get perceived as being this kind of leader that really understands parents and their kids? And then how does my messaging need to change to reflect that? And so that's kind of the work that we've been doing. And then ultimately that's going to lead to kind of different packaging and different visuals that we're using to represent all of that stuff.
Well, and that sounds like a lot of fun to be able to jump in to some completely new niche that isn't just the usual, businessy stuff and pontificating about branding and kind of like, you know what I'm talking about, Michael, right? When like you get like so caught up in like business terms and abstract things, and sometimes it's fun just to be like, okay, what are people looking for? Where's the gap in the marketplace? And you kind of exhaust the content about, well, talking about ingredients and healthy stuff, but then kind of taking it another level or two kind of further out and being like, okay, like what's the emotional things that are bringing them to me, and what even led them to searching for this, and how would they, like, why would they choose me instead of someone else? And so it seems like it's a lot of fun, especially just kind of like starting from scratch there. And so like what were the steps involved in going from just the idea to having all this branding and all this stuff in place? Like I mean, do you start with the box design, or do you look for suppliers, or like where do you even begin to crack this nut?
Yeah, when we think about kind of the whole business angle, you've got an idea for a product and you got to make the product. So obviously, supplements or anything you're going to put in your mouth in general, you're going to ingest. You're probably not going to make it in your garage. So you gotta find those partners, and the supplements in particular aren't too hard to find. Co-packer, contract manufacturers that will kind of build it to your specs and put it in a bottle. So those are a bit more of the kind of, and happy to kind of talk through all those, but the business nuances are certainly important. Making sure you can make a product and consistently make it, and it's a good quality product, are all things that I think for a startup and getting moving, today it's easier than ever to leverage partners. And I think that people looking to do something similar should steer away early on from trying to do everything themselves, and really leverage the experts that can do that. Because the hard part that's going to be hard to find anyone to do well for you is those other pieces that we talked about of really the branding and the consumer perception. Going back to what I said, there's so many choices consumers have. And so I think that it's easy to gloss over how important that is, and how big of an impact subtle differences can make. And really the only way and there's a lot of guesswork that happens, and it still happens today, every day, but we tend to try to get in front of consumers and test those ideas. So measure, put it in front of them, simulate a buying experience, show them different ideas, understand how it's perceived, and if it kind of aligns with what they're looking for. And that's really our recipe for success of putting it's a lot of work to put something on the shelf, print thousands of labels, and then a co-packer is going to put it all together, and you got a finished product. And it's not really easy to change something like you can with a digital ad if it's not right. And so there's a lot of benefit to doing that upfront work to get it right the first time.
Well, fair enough. Yeah, a lot of moving parts and a lot of like mistakes that could be made in one area that then ripple out into other problems in other areas. And so I imagine there could be some kind of like scary things happening. And do you have any stories along those lines? Like it could be with the Squiggles brand, or it could be with something else, but has there been in your line of work, in your years of experience, has there been like a real panic moment? Has there been a time when like things were rocking and rolling, and you were, on whatever step 3 of 12, and you totally hit a wall, and there was like an emergency and you weren't sure what was going to happen next, and you had to maybe think creatively to get outside of a jam?
Gosh, there's tons of examples, really. I think that and I don't know how illustrative any one of them in particular would be, other than of, you know, as we talk about Amazon in particular, I mean, you can make or break your business by making mistakes on there. And whether it's, which we've had experience with, of, you know, not complying with some nuance of Amazon's terms of service, or in the case of doing something that's perfectly legal, but actually is against Amazon's terms of service, and in particular related to, say, some things that you might say in comparison to other products. And really, you know, I've learned a hard lesson many years ago on a product that we actually don't sell anymore. And I could probably attribute it to this kind of mistake. And early on in that Amazon business, of getting a listing delisted because of the way that we were referencing a competitor. And the I'm not going to call out the competitor, but we all know when you go into a CVS or a Rite Aid or Albertsons, and you've got the store brands, and you've got, let's say you're in the lotion aisle, and you've got Neutrogena, big brand, really expensive products. And then they've got the house brand that's right next to it, said, compare to the ingredients of Neutrogena. And so some people are going to buy the brand name that they trust, and some are going to buy the other brand that because it's very similar. And there's actually nothing wrong with that. You're calling out the trademarks, but in this particular case, it caused us to have a listing delisted, and just kind of not taking the right steps, not being proactive enough. 3 months later, when the listing was finally put back in place, it was difficult to recover from that. So there's, I think that the key is to just be reactive and fast of trying to correct for things, and of course trying to avoid them to begin with is quite important.
And yeah, I mean, it seems so scary, all of the potential dangers that could come across, like even just from Amazon itself, right? All these weird rules and regulations, and then even like that gray area of like the copyrights and the trademarks, like you mentioned there, like you always hear little things like that, like you can't, you're not allowed to like open a hamburger stand and say, well, our burgers are like better than McDonald's, even though you're saying I'm not McDonald's, but even like referencing them in some of those weird ways gets you in trouble. And even if you think you have a handle on that, who knows what kind of rules change, and even with Amazon itself. And you always hear these stories with these competitors, right? With the pricing robots undercutting you, or stealing the buy box from you, or sending in like bogus claims of like the counterfeiting and things like that. Like, or even when there's like food or supplements involved, you hear even more horror stories, right? About the expiration dates, or things not labeled right, or having all kinds of extra like inventory that you have to decide, am I going to pay Amazon to trash all this, or will I pay Amazon to send it to me in the mail, and all these crazy, scary things. And so it's really hammering the point home for me, listening to some of your stories, is how important it is to talk to an expert, talk to a professional, consult with someone who has been there and who knows the things that you're looking for, not just the knowns, but also the unknowns, right? Who knows about the things that you hadn't even thought of. And so this is all cool to think about as far as your success on Amazon, your kind of fun experiments and things like that. And even though it might not exactly apply to this audience, you never know who's listening. I kind of want to go a little bit wider in scope and talk about Smash Brand and some of the other things that you guys do, because this is kind of fun to think about as far as like practical Amazon e-commerce usage, but also as far as Smash Brand in general. Like, what else do you guys do, and what sort of size clients do you work with?
So our agency is rather niche, exclusively dealing with clients, usually in market, but we do work with startup brands too. But ultimately, they're putting a product on the shelf. Consumer CPG, consumer packaged goods, and you know, on the shelf is proverbial these days, because it's just as much online. But even as you look at e-commerce and physical products that come in the mail versus the grocery store or drugstore. So those are the kind of products that we are focused on helping brands bring to market. And typically they've got an idea of what their product is, what's going to go in the bottle or box or whatever it is. And our job really as branding experts is to understand the consumer and understand how we represent that product through words and visuals on pack to give them the best performance on shelf, like meaning the most sales, driving the most sales. And so that comes down to having a brand strategy, differentiate from your competition, both visually and conceptually, and then ultimately having a great product is the recipe for success, and really kind of where we spend most of our time.
Well, cool. And I mean, this is fun to think about because like there's probably like four or five different types of people that we're talking to right now, Michael. There's like people who are like exactly the fit for you and what you're talking about. There's kind of like the Amazon crowd that we unpacked a little bit. There's also kind of the angle to talk about of just kind of hearing about your mindset. So it's all useful, even if you might feel a little like niche or drill down. But so what interests me is, so you mentioned there about if you're dealing with like these CPG, consumer packaged good clients, you're saying that like one of the kind of important criteria in there is standing out, right? Because like there's like this limited shelf space, and I'm sure that like everyone else on the shelf is already having like bright colors or doing their own things to stand out. And so is there, in these last few minutes here we're talking, is there like a fun story, anything that comes to mind as far as you doing this, you like kind of thinking outside the box and coming up with a way to make packaging really stand out, even compared to what they already might have planned?
Yeah, actually, might as well talk about this. This is a project we worked on last year, and it's just it was such a fun project. And so it's canned tomatoes, and this is a brand, Red Gold. They've been in business for 5 generations. They're in the Midwest, and they were the largest producer of tomatoes. And we can all relate to this story. You walk down the tomato aisle at the grocery store, it's unchanged and boring as hell. There's just been, and why should anyone care? It's a can of tomatoes. And so, but when you're a brand like them, and really, how do you stand out? So we deconstructed this problem. We think about, okay, if people aren't really paying attention, then no matter what you say, it's not likely going to get noticed. And so you've got your first objective here is you've got to really stand out and grab that attention. And so visually standing out, and we talked a little bit about earlier about differentiating both visually and conceptually. And so to win here, you got to stand out on the shelf first, and then you bring your kind of your message and your story forward. And so for them, they really do make the best tomatoes. And this particular canned tomatoes that we're working on were as common too as diced tomatoes and chilies, and they're used like queso dip and all these things. And they've got plenty of competitors. But the idea of coming together of a company that does nothing but tomatoes, and their competitors are all, whether ketchup and Hunt's and Heinz and Rotel and big corporate America. And so just bringing forward a really fun visual design of the idea of tomato love, and almost pushing the boundary of some innuendos there and things like this. That's what was needed to break up the shelf. Attracting a younger millennial audience. They're all parents, becoming parents now, and really hitting that phase of life. But you had just kind of a boring shelf, and so a new brand can do this and really has nothing to lose, and can attempt and succeed or not. But an existing brand, someone that's protecting a rather large existing consumer base, staying on shelf. To be successful there, you have to take these ideas and really take them into testing. And so we did a lot of testing here, and starting early on the idea of what the brand stands for. Does that resonate? What audience does that stand for? And then these visuals of really standing out on the shelf and cutting through that kind of boringness of the shelf. Just all in all, there were so many pieces across, as we think about what the job of a product's packaging is on shelf to do, of really optimizing every phase along the way, and ultimately coming out with a product it's really fun. It's something that you probably even be excited to just sit on your shelf, and which is just the opposite of everything in that tomato aisle. So that was just a lot of fun, a really fun project to work on that covered every piece that we really think about of what packaging needs to do to be successful.
And that's interesting to think about. Just like so many times there's like, well, sometimes I'm trying to solve my own problem, or I'm trying to think of like some new perspective on something in my own business. And I need to like get a fresh perspective. I need to maybe not turn off all the thinking, but like see how someone else does it, or kind of get into someone else's mindset, thought process. So it's interesting to hear about like kind of what you went through, and even like how you're talking about, well, you looked at the existing aisle and it was boring. You were talking about how you were looking kind of to get attention in steps, like first by just the first impression, and then like the name, and then like the story behind it. And even like when you mentioned that like tomato love, like you said, there's like a little bit of the innuendo in there, and it's like with the red and the tomato, you think of like a heart, and you think of like the love you're putting into like cooking the spaghetti sauce or something like that. It's kind of cool to think about when the rest of the aisle is Hunts and Heinz and the store brand and things like that. It's really cool to think about and to get a little bit of a glimpse into your thought process. And so, like we said, Michael, like there's some people who are listening who are exactly the right fit for you and what you do, and the rest of us are here to get inspired and get a fun and good story. So for those people who want to know more about you and Smash Brand and everything else you have going on, what are the resources? What are the links? What are the next steps?
So connecting with me directly, I think I'm pretty easy to find on LinkedIn, Michael Keplinger, Smash Brand. But really, to dig in a little deeper for what we do, and really kind of how we apply this way of thinking to a lot of different examples. I think we have a lot of case studies on our website. We publish a lot of articles, smashbrand.com.
All right, fantastic. Smashbrand.com, and go there to check out those case studies, check out those articles. And if you are a CPG type of business and you think that Michael and his company will be a good fit for you, go ahead and contact them. Is there any kind of like specific ideal client that you're looking for here, Michael? If someone says, I'm listening and that's exactly me, I should go to smashbrand.com and contact them. Does anyone come to mind as far as like the ideal description?
I think where we have a lot of success and where there's a lot of value to clients is mid-range CPG brands. And when I say by mid-range is you're not the big Coca-Cola, but you've got national distribution. You've got something that but you've got all these ankle biters, the challenger brands that are coming and really eroding market share. And that middle brand there, what they need to do to be relevant, to stay relevant, is they need to make changes and address the market in more bold ways than they're comfortable. And the reason why we can be beneficial there is because testing, like I've talked a little bit about, is an integral part of every step that we do. And so we're helped to reduce the risk for clients to make the changes that they need to do to address the market, much like I talked about with Tomato Love, to make some bold steps that resonate and know that you're not going to make a mistake that costs you all of your market share if we already are.
Fantastic. Michael Keplinger, smashbrand.com. We will see you there, whether you're super serious and rearing to go, or you just want to know a little bit more about this branding thing and Michael and his company and what he is doing, smashbrand.com. And thank you, Michael, for stopping by and sharing some cool stories and advice with us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Robert. It's been a pleasure.